It all began on a warm Saturday morning in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The sound of sprinklers ticking, children laughing, and dogs barking should have been the only soundtrack to the day. But for the Johnson family, peace was about to be shattered. You're going to want to stick around for this one, because what started as harassment by a couple of so-called HOA cops turned into a jaw-dropping showdown when they learned who the Johnsons really were. And let me tell you, the ending is something you'll never forget. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand not only the courage it takes to stand up against bullies hiding behind fake authority, but also how one man's secret past turned the tables in the most dramatic way imaginable. And before we dive deeper, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next upload. Now, let's get into it. The Johnsons had just moved into their new home, a modest two-story house with a red brick porch and a flagpole out front. Mr. David Johnson, his wife Monique, and their two kids were excited to finally settle into what they thought would be a safe and welcoming neighborhood. But not everyone felt the same way. As David unloaded boxes from the back of his SUV, two men approached. They wore black polo shirts with HOA security stitched on the chest in bold white letters, clipboards in hand, and smug expressions plastered across their faces. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask what you're doing here," one of them barked. David paused, confused. "We're moving in. This is our house." The taller of the two scoffed. "That's funny. This community doesn't allow renters." His eyes lingered cold and judgmental. David's jaw tightened. "We're not renters. We bought this house." But the men weren't listening. They circled the SUV, peering inside as if searching for something illegal. His wife Monique stepped out, clutching her daughter's hand. The shorter man muttered just loud enough for her to hear. "Figures. Probably forged paperwork. People like them always try to sneak in." Her face flushed with humiliation. David's son Malik clenched his fists, ready to speak, but his father gave him a look, not yet. The fake HOA cops escalated quickly. They claimed they had the authority to fine the family for unloading too many boxes on the street. They threatened to call backup if David didn't provide proof of ownership immediately. David remained calm, though inside his blood boiled. He had endured plenty of discrimination before, but never on the very doorstep of the home he had worked his whole life to provide for his family. "Show me your IDs," David demanded. The taller man sneered. "We don't need to show you anything. We enforce the rules here." That was the first red flag. No real HOA has enforcers, and certainly none that patrol in pairs like they own the neighborhood. But these men weren't just bluffing. They were looking for a fight. And they were about to get one. Minutes later, the so-called HOA cops made good on their threat. They pulled out radios and pretended to call in reinforcements, pacing like they were conducting an official operation. Neighbors started peeking through their blinds. Some whispered. Others took out their phones, recording the spectacle. Monique whispered to her husband, "David, please, don't let this get worse." But David's calm stare said everything. He wasn't just a man moving into a new house. He was something more, something these fake enforcers had no idea about. And then the confrontation reached its peak. The taller man shoved David's box of books off the sidewalk. "I'm telling you for the last time, you don't belong here. You need to leave before we remove you ourselves." Gasps rippled from the watching neighbors. David's son Malik yelled, "Stop! That's our stuff!" The shorter man laughed. "Kid, you'd better watch your mouth. You're not in your kind of neighborhood anymore." That was it. Enough was enough. David calmly set down the box in his hands. His broad shoulders straightened. His eyes hardened into the same steel gaze that had once struck fear into enemies across the world. "You've made a mistake," he said quietly. The men sneered. "Oh yeah, and what mistake is that?" David slowly reached into his wallet and pulled out a laminated ID, an ID that bore the emblem of the U.S. military. He flipped it open, holding it just long enough for both men and the recording neighbors to see. Delta Force. Their smirks evaporated. Their confidence cracked. The color drained from their faces as they realized the man they were trying to intimidate wasn't just any homeowner. He was a decorated Delta Force commander, trained in tactics, discipline, and yes, authority far greater than their pathetic charade. "Let me explain this very clearly," David said, his voice low and commanding. "You're not HOA. You're not law enforcement. You're impersonating officers, and you're trespassing on my property." The crowd that had gathered fell silent. Even the children playing nearby froze. The two fake cops stumbled, trying to form excuses. "We were just making sure," but David cut them off. "Enough!" David pulled out his phone and called someone directly. "This is Commander Johnson," he said firmly. "I've got 2 suspects impersonating officers and harassing my family. I want them picked up." Within minutes, 2 real patrol cars pulled into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing. The imposters panicked. "Wait! This is all a misunderstanding!" But the officers weren't buying it. Neighbors stepped forward with recordings. The evidence was damning. Handcuffs clicked, wrists bound. The fake HOA cops were led away in shame. But just as the family thought it was over, one of the men snarled as he was shoved into the back seat of the cruiser. "This isn't finished. You don't know who we work for." David's eyes narrowed. He knew that tone, that arrogance. This wasn't just random harassment. This was organized. Something bigger was lurking beneath the surface. And in that moment, the Johnsons realized the fight for their peace had only just begun. The neighborhood erupted in applause as the cruisers pulled away. David turned to his family, calm once more, but with the faint shadow of wariness in his eyes. He knew battles came in many forms, on foreign soil and right here at home. And this one was far from over. What seemed like a simple case of harassment had opened the door to a deeper conspiracy. Who were these men really working for? And why target his family? The answers would shake the entire neighborhood. If you've been enjoying this story so far, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my latest uploads. Now let's continue, because the ending to this story will leave you speechless. The imposters thought being dragged off in handcuffs was the end of it, but for Commander David Johnson, it was only the beginning. He had spent too many years on the battlefield to ignore a warning like the one they gave him. "You don't know who we work for." At first, David wanted to let it go. The police had them, the neighbors had seen the truth, and his family's dignity had been restored. But deep down, he knew men like that didn't act alone. There was a shadow behind their arrogance, someone feeding them power. And that truth was about to come out. 2 days later, David received a call from the county sheriff's office. "Commander Johnson, you'll want to hear this," the sheriff said. "Those 2 men you had arrested, they're not just random impersonators. They've been running an illegal HOA ring across several neighborhoods, extorting families, issuing fake fines, even forcing some out of their homes." David's grip on the phone tightened. His instincts had been right. "And here's the kicker," the sheriff added. "We traced their funding. They're backed by a powerful developer, the same one who's been buying up property in your subdivision. I think they wanted to scare you out before you even unpacked." The irony cut deep. The very house he had worked his whole life to buy was part of a larger scheme. These men weren't just harassing him. They were trying to control the entire neighborhood. Word spread quickly. Neighbors who had stayed silent began speaking up. An elderly woman revealed she had been fined $500 for having the wrong color flowers in her garden. A young couple admitted they were threatened with eviction if they didn't pay cash dues to the so-called HOA cops. The truth was ugly, and David wasn't about to let it slide. He agreed to testify, not as a soldier this time, but as a father, a homeowner, and a citizen tired of bullies hiding behind false authority. The courtroom was packed the day of the trial. Local media swarmed the building, eager to cover the story of 2 imposters who had finally been caught. Inside, the 2 fake HOA cops sat pale and nervous, their bravado gone. Their so-called backers, wealthy developers, sat behind expensive lawyers, hoping money would bury the truth. But when David walked into that courtroom in his suit, the room shifted. He wasn't carrying weapons. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. When he took the stand, the prosecutor asked him a simple question. "Mr. Johnson, Can you tell the court what happened the day these men confronted your family? David leaned into the microphone, his voice steady. Yes. They told me I didn't belong. They told my family we had no place in our own home. They threatened us, insulted us, and tried to intimidate us. But what they didn't know is that I've faced men with real power, men with weapons, armies, and nations behind them, and I never flinched. Did they really think a couple of con artists with clipboards could break us? The jury hung on his every word. The prosecutor pulled out recordings from neighbors' phones, footage of the imposters mocking David's son, calling his wife names, and threatening to remove them. The evidence was damning. One by one, the neighbors stood and gave testimony. The elderly woman, the young couple, families from across the neighborhood, all united, emboldened by David's courage. The judge looked down at the defendants, her face hard as stone. This is more than impersonation. This is extortion, harassment, and organized crime under the guise of authority. You exploited fear. You preyed on families. And today, justice demands consequences. Her gavel came down, guilty on all charges. But it wasn't over yet. The wealthy developer who had funded the scheme leaned back, smirking as if his lawyers would shield him. That's when the prosecutor revealed the final blow. Bank records tying the developer directly to the impostor's so-called fines. The smirk vanished. The courtroom erupted. The developer, once untouchable, was ordered to stand trial for conspiracy and fraud. His empire began crumbling that very day. And here's the beautiful irony. Justice wasn't served with weapons or power plays. It was served with truth, community, and the courage of one man who refused to bow. Weeks later, the Johnson family sat on their porch as neighbors passed by, waving, smiling, some even stopping to thank them. The same neighborhood that had once been tense and suspicious now felt united, stronger. David sipped his coffee, watching his kids play on the lawn. Monique leaned against him and whispered, "You didn't just save us, David. You saved everyone." He smiled faintly. That's what commanders do. But then came the true justice. Those same neighbors who once peeked through blinds and whispered from afar held a community meeting. Together, they voted out the old HOA board that had secretly cooperated with the developer. And in its place, they elected a new one led by fairness, transparency, and dignity. At the top of the list for president, Monique Johnson. The very woman they once tried to humiliate now stood as the voice of the entire neighborhood. And this time, her authority was real. Justice had been served. Not just against two men pretending to be powerful, but against a system that thought it could buy silence. David and his family finally had the peace they deserved. And the imposters. They sat in prison, haunted by the day they dared to challenge a Delta Force commander on his own doorstep. And so the story ends here, with dignity restored, justice delivered, and bullies unmasked. The lesson? Real power doesn't come from intimidation, uniforms, or money. It comes from truth, from integrity, from the courage to stand tall even when others try to tear you down. Because at the end of the day, fear fades. But justice leaves a mark forever. Now let me ask you this. If you were in David's shoes that day, would you have stayed calm like he did, or would you have fought back right there on the spot? Comment your answer below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one.